Hey, this is Swoopy, and you're listening to Skepticality, the official podcast of Skeptic Magazine for Tuesday, December 11th, 2012.
Swoopy's back for a moment. I missed you.
Why is your face so close to my face?
Because I don't have the other microphone set up, so we have to be face to face.
I'm not feeling it.
What are you not
You're too close to my face. Get your face away from my face.
Skepticality. Science!
Welcome back to another episode of Skepticality, the show that features news and interviews with scientists, researchers, and people from all walks of life for the promotion of critical thought and science. I hope you're keeping warm as we head deeper into the dark winter months. One thing that might keep you a bit warmer, or stave off the holiday malaise, would be Bob Carroll and the gang, who are here to give you insights into the world of science and skeptical thought.
This is Bob Carroll, creator of the Skeptics Dictionary and the blog Unnatural Acts That Can Improve Your Thinking. Welcome to another episode of Unnatural Virtue. Today's topic is the polygraph. Last year, more than 73,000 Americans across the country submitted a polygraph test to get or keep jobs with one of the 15 federal agencies that use a device virtually no scientist thinks is any better than torture for determining whether someone is telling the truth. The CIA, the FBI, the National Security Agency, the Department of Energy, and the Postal Inspection Service are just a few of high-profile federal groups that rely on a pseudoscientific device to weed out the liars and cheats trying to weasel their way into government positions where they can steal our secrets and bring down whatever regime was voted in during the last election. Are those who run these federal agencies idiots? Why do they use a device that is banned from every courtroom in America because of its unreliability and inherent defects? I don't think they're idiots. I think many of these folks know what they're doing. Their main goal is not to ferret out liars by measuring blood pressure, heart rate, galvanic skin response, and breathing rhythms. Their main goal is to scare ignorant people into confessing to their evil ways. There must be millions of people who do not realize that the polygraph, though called the lie detector, cannot tell with any degree of accuracy when a person is lying. Some of these ignorant folks actually think that the polygraph will exonerate them, so they willingly agree to take the so-called test. Other ignorant folks can be scared into confessing just by threatening them with a polygraph test. I think President Richard Nixon put it best. "I don't know anything about lie detectors," he said, "other than that they scare the hell out of people." Well, if you knew anything about the polygraph, you would laugh in the face of anyone who wanted you to take the polygraph test. These devices are no more based in good science than L. Ron Hubbard's e-meter or Albert Abrams' radionics device boxes. The underlying theory of the polygraph is that when people lie, they also get measurably nervous about lying. The heartbeat increases, blood pressure goes up, breathing rhythms change, perspiration increases, and so on. That may be true for most people, but these same physiological responses occur for many different reasons. Anyway, a baseline for these physiological characteristics is established by the expert, who asks the subject questions whose answers are known to the expert. Deviation from the baseline for truthfulness is taken as a sign of lying. The machine measures changes in blood pressure, pulse, and respiration rate. It's assumed that these physiological changes occur in such a way that a trained expert can detect whether a person is lying. Is there a scientific formula or law which establishes a regular correlation between such physiological changes and lying? No. Is there any scientific evidence that polygraph experts can detect lies at a significantly better rate than non-experts using other methods? No. The reason the polygraph is not a lie detector is that what it measures, changes in heartbeat, blood pressure, and respiration, can be caused by many things. Nervousness, anger, sadness, embarrassment, and fear can all be causal factors in altering one's heart rate, blood pressure, or respiration rate. Having to go to the bathroom can also be causative. There are also a number of medical conditions, such as colds, headaches, constipation, or neurological and muscular problems that can cause the physiological changes measured by the polygraph. The claim that an expert can tell when the changes are due to a lie and when they are due to other factors has never been proven. Even if the device measures nervousness, one cannot be sure that the cause of the nervousness is fear of being caught in a lie. Some people may fear that the machine will indicate they're lying when they're telling the truth, and that they'll be falsely accused of lying. Furthermore, even the most ardent advocate of the polygraph must admit that liars can sometimes pass their tests. One need only remember the spy Aldrich James, who passed the polygraph test several times while with the CIA. This lesson was completely lost in the FBI, however, who started requiring polygraph tests of its employees after spy Robert Hansen was caught. Heretofore, the FBI had only used the polygraph on suspected criminals. Apparently, the FBI thinks that they could have prevented Hansen's betrayal if only he had been made to take the polygraph. Are there any benefits to using the polygraph? The only consistent benefit is that it sometimes scares people into confessing bad deeds, and it scares some ignorant liars away who won't take the test for fear of not passing the test. That benefit is far outweighed by the harm it does in giving us a false sense of security when someone is given a pass on the test by some expert. The benefit is also far outweighed by the harm it does to all those truthful, decent people who were denied employment because some expert failed them on the polygraph test. Besides trying to scare people, why would so many government and law enforcement agencies and so many private sector employers want to use a polygraph if the scientific community is convinced the machine is bogus? Is it just wishful thinking? Do the users of the polygraph want to believe there's a quick and dirty way to determine who's lying and who's not, so they blind themselves to the lack of evidence? Is there an esoteric technology factor? The polygraph machine looks like a sophisticated space-age device of modern technology. It can be administered correctly only by experts trained in its arcane ways. Non-experts are at the mercy of the high-tech, specially trained wizards who alone can deliver the prize, a decision as to who is lying and who is not. Maybe the defenders of the polygraph fall into the same class as the defenders of homeopathy, acupuncture, and every other bogus health practice or device. They know it works. They've seen it with their own eyes. Case after case can be used to exemplify that the polygraph works. There are the cases of those who failed the test and whose lying was corroborated by other evidence. There are the cases of those who, seeing they are failing the test, suddenly confess. Well, as long as you ignore all the cases that count against your position, I guess it's easy to believe that the polygraph works. Well, that's it for this episode of Unnatural Virtue. To find out more about the topics mentioned here, see the show notes and my website, The Skeptic's Dictionary, and my blog, Unnatural Acts That Can Improve Your Thinking. In the meantime, please commit some unnatural acts in public. And don't forget, skepticism, though unnatural, is a virtue.
I'm Heather Henderson, and this is the News and Religion. The Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints has launched the website mormonsandgays.org, in which it calls for Mormons of all stripes to love one another. In 2008, Mormons faced intense criticism after church authorities offered vocal support and funding for California's Proposition 8, a ballot measure that called for a ban on gay marriage. The backlash was swift, and church leaders say they were stunned by the negative response. Since then, the church has been actively reaching out to the LGBT community to heal tensions. CNN reports that the website's launch appears to support the belief held by some gay marriage activists that the LDS Church is toning down its opposition to same-sex marriage. However, church leaders still insist that they aren't changing the Mormon teaching that same-sex relationships are sinful. Well, isn't that nice? A 7-year-old boy was beaten to death by his parents last week after he failed to read the Bible and do his homework, according to the Las Vegas Metro Police. The boy's stepfather, Marquise Palmer, 34, and the boy's mother, Dina Palmer, 27, were arrested and charged with murder, child abuse, and neglect in the beating death of Roderick Arrington, a second grader at Roundy Elementary School. Marquise Palmer admitted to police that he spanked Arrington because he allegedly lied about reading a chapter in the Bible. Dina Palmer claimed that she struck Arrington on his buttocks with both a belt and her hand, according to the report. Police recovered belts, cords, spatulas, bloodied clothes, and a broken broomstick covered in what appeared to be blood from a warrant search of the Palmer residence. These horrific allegations of child abuse stand in stark contrast to the couple's Facebook pages, which seemingly show a loving and religious family devoted to Roderick Arrington, nicknamed RJ. In an unrelated story, a mother who beat her 7-year-old son to death for failing to learn the Quran by heart was found guilty by a British jury on Wednesday of murdering him and burning his body to hide the evidence. Sarah Eage, 33, a mathematics graduate from India, treated her son Yasin like a dog, beating him with a stick when he failed to memorize religious texts. Yasin died in July 2010. It was initially thought that he had been killed in a fire at the family home in Cardiff, but tests later revealed that he was dead before the blaze began. In her confession, which was recorded by police and shown to the jury, Eage detailed how her son had collapsed on the day of his death, still murmuring passages from the Quran, the holy book of Islam. You know, maybe those stories are related. I wonder why you never hear about a child being killed for not memorizing Horton Hears a Who. I'm Heather Henderson, and this was the News and Religion. Visit my other podcasts at ardentatheist.com and skepticallyyours.net. Special thanks to my audio engineer, Emery. The News and Religion was brought to you through the scientific method.
Matt Kaplan, a science journalist who has published extensively in Nature and The Economist, seeks to explain monsters in his new book, Medusa's Gaze and Vampire's Bite, The Science of Monsters. Kaplan was interviewed by Ira Flato on NPR's Science Friday shortly before Halloween. Kaplan's book is in the tradition of Adrian Mayer's The First Fossil Hunters and Elizabeth Whalen Barber and Paul Barber's When They Severed Earth from Sky, both of which he cites. All these books attempt to find real-world explanations for mythological and folkloric stories. None is entirely convincing. I can imagine that Kaplan is a good science journalist. When he is discussing blue-footed boobies or parasitic fungus, he seems knowledgeable and entertaining. In his last 2 chapters, about Jurassic Park and alien movies, he discusses the science behind modern science fiction. These discussions are successful, but for most of the book, his observations are speculative, unsupported, and in many cases, ludicrous. He attempts to read literature, mythology, and folklore literally and find naturalistic explanations for them. He's trying to scientifically explain the humanities, and frankly, the humanities are better explaining the humanities than science is. Let's begin with one of his more plausible explanations. He suggests that Charybdis, a sea monster first described by Homer in the Odyssey, is a whirlpool. This is not a huge stretch, as Homer says it's a whirlpool. You might think it would be unnecessary to go beyond this. Whirlpools exist. Homer made a monster out of one of them. But no. Kaplan has to figure out what kind of whirlpool it was. He spends a couple paragraphs considering whether it could have been a whirlpool caused by a tsunami, but eventually reaches the obvious conclusion that tsunami-induced whirlpools are ephemeral, and Charybdis is not. He then discusses tidal whirlpools at great length, but is troubled because he can't locate a whirlpool that fits Homer's description in the right region, one that is extremely strong and violent, and that vomits forth water 3 times a day and sucks it back down again 3 times a day. He finds this baffling, since there are usually only 2 low tides and 2 high tides a day. He also worries that there are no strong whirlpools in the Mediterranean. After a couple more pages of discussion, he decides that a comparatively minor whirlpool near Sicily, which has been identified as Charybdis, may once have been stronger before being diminished by earthquakes. His identification of Charybdis may be accurate. It apparently isn't new, but it's stunningly unnecessary, and his determination to fit every detail in an orally composed poem to reality is absurd. Exaggerating the number of times the whirlpool vomits and sucks water isn't baffling. It's poetic license. His discussions of less obviously natural monsters is no better. He posits fossilized remains as the explanation of malformed or chimerical animals, including Chimera itself and Cerberus, the 3-headed hound of Hades. Chimera is described as part lion, part goat, and part serpent or dragon. What kind of fossilized animal could have accounted for such a beast? Well, no single animal, but rather a collection of fossils, a jumbled tangle of remains. Specifically, he suggests a goat may have gotten stuck in a tar pit. A lion happens by, sees an easy meal, and also gets stuck. Both die and attract vultures, which don't get stuck, but which draw the attention of a bird-hunting viper, which gets stuck, along with the goat and lion. And voila, chimera! No, really, he actually suggests this. And chimera isn't alone. In the same tar pit we have a horse that was scavenged by a vulture with bad luck. Pegasus. The Sphinx is there too, as is Charybdis's buddy Scylla. This seems like an implausible set of circumstances. Not just the animals getting caught in the tar pit, as Kaplan suggests, but also someone seeing them, and not in Greece because there are no tar pits close by, identifying the remains as strange monsters, and successfully spreading the stories. His explanation of Cerberus is less absurd, but still unnecessary and unsupported. He argues that stories concerning Cerberus may have arisen from multiple wolves, say, for instance, 3, being swept up by raging waters and fossilized together. Observers would have seen something dog-like with 3 skulls. But is a natural explanation really necessary? Cerberus, the guardian of Hades, is not natural. He is supernatural. What's good at guarding property? Dogs. What would be really good at guarding property? How about a dog with 3 heads, 3 noses, 6 ears, and 6 eyes? In discussing European fire-breathing dragons, Kaplan, following the Barbers, suggests that they are based on ignited gases in mines and graves. He discusses the story of Merlin, who explains to the British king Vortigern that the reason the foundations of his tower keep collapsing is because there are dragons underneath. Kaplan suggests that the dragons were actually trapped gases. He says, quote, "One has to wonder if Merlin caught the scent of methane or hydrogen sulfide in the air, knew about the chemistry of coal mines, and assumed that people would view his ability to predict such explosive fire as magic. If true, it seems appropriate to consider Merlin more of a geologist than a wizard." Unquote. No, it seems more appropriate to consider Merlin a fictional character, because he's a fictional character. In the notes to his introduction, Kaplan says, quote, "There is no way to know with certainty what was actually in our ancestors' minds when they invented the various monsters that have come to haunt our world. We have to guess. Guesses come in many forms. There are those of the wild variety, and there are educated ones, guided by shreds of evidence. You will find the latter in this book." Unquote. Guesses that simply sound science-y are not quite the same as educated guesses. Kaplan reads literary and mythological works in the same way young Earth creationists and ancient alien enthusiasts do, with no understanding of metaphor, symbolism, or creativity. Kaplan talks a great deal about evolution, but he seems to ignore that humans have evolved an extraordinary ability to imagine and create.
Hello and welcome to The Odds Must Be Crazy on Skepticality, where we put the awe back in coincidence.
There was never an awe in coincidence.
That you know of.
I'm Wendy Hughes.
And I'm Jarrett Kaufman.
And we're here to tell you stories that will take you to the far corners of the world. Or at least to the intersection of timing and geography.
I imagine there are a lot of merge signs in the coincidence zone. Anyway, this story about a surprise encounter was contributed by blog reader Carl Nichols. You can find it on our site starting today by searching for the lengthy title, At the Corner of Coincidence Near the House of Commons, or by clicking on the link in the show notes. Carl writes,
15 years ago or so, I was working in London, just around the corner from the House of Commons. Nothing unusual there. But one lunchtime I was crossing the road, and in the car in front of the queue of traffic that had stopped at the light was, to my surprise, my parents. My parents live in a small village in Suffolk, about 90 miles from London. Not a huge distance in the U.S., but Britain is only 600 miles long, so a reasonable distance here. They would come to London perhaps 3 or 4 times a year, but coming into central London much more rarely. As I'm sure you're aware, London isn't a small place, and I would be reasonably surprised to randomly bump into anyone I knew, even if they lived in the city and who happened to be in London for the day. What are the odds of crossing the road in one of the biggest cities in the world at the same time your parents are driving through that same spot?
Wow, that's pretty startling. Reminds me of the series finale of Sex and the City, where Carrie was standing right in front of Big's car in Paris, and neither one noticed.
Sex in the City, Jared? Really?
My girlfriend made me watch it. Anyway, Barbara Drescher, our resident statistician and cognitive psychologist, did some digging and gave us her thoughts on this. I believe you have those in the script in front of you, Wendy?
Yep, right where I left them. Barbara said, I found this story interesting, even though the odds of this happening are much higher than they are in most of the location coincidence stories that we get. In fact, I'm actually more interested in why the author did not know that the parents would be in town. It seems that seeing their child might be part of their plans.
I'd expect family who lives a couple of hours away to at least check in with me to see if we could grab a bite to eat.
I agree. Meanwhile, Barbara points out some other parts of the story that seem odd to an observer. The parties involved did not travel thousands of miles and see each other in a remote location, but it still feels unbelievable. A car can move pretty fast, making it feel as though where someone in a car is at any given time is much more variable than someone on foot.
That's a pretty good point. Cars both raise the range of a story like this and reduce the time windows. What else?
The placement of the car at the light might seem to make the odds of this incident even crazier, but if it was not in front, the author may not even have known that his parents were there. When crossing streets, people make eye contact with drivers, both because our parents taught us to, and because it's kind of a natural survival instinct. Not that you could tell at my son's middle school. The drivers in cars that are poised to run us over get our attention, but not those that are not. How many times has a similar incident occurred and yet nobody noticed because the parents were in the second or third car rather than the first? If you have ever discovered afterward that a friend was at the same event, a ball game, a concert, a trade show, at the same time that you were, yet you didn't run into each other, think about how many times that must have happened, but because it didn't come up in conversation, you never knew.
That happens to me frequently, when it's too late to enjoy the coincidence.
Jared, that's what Foursquare is for. Now it notifies when you are in the same place as your friends so you don't miss out.
Sounds like business might be picking up for us.
Thanks for listening to The Odds Must Be Crazy. Make sure you visit our website and add your voice to the comment threads. That's the secret ingredient that's been missing all along.
Also, be sure to follow us on Twitter, like us on Facebook, circle us on Google+, and validate us in life. Hit the Submit a Story link on our site to share your own crazy stories, or tweet the short ones with the hashtag TOMBC.
The Odds Must Be Crazy is a project in collaboration with the Independent Investigations Group in Los Angeles, California. Visit them at iigwest.org.
Barbara Drescher is a contributing editor to our blog and can also be found at icbseverywhere.com.
Our theme music comes to us courtesy of Mr. Deity himself, Brian Keith Dalton. You can find him at mrdeity.com.
And don't forget to carefully study the faces of all the drivers around you for familiar ones. You might just see someone you know in the car in front of you.
Although in some cases you're probably better off if they don't see you, too.
Got some enemies, Wendy?
Not anymore. I saw them before they saw me.
As I mentioned before, we get some great suggestions for guests here at Skepticality. The interview you're about to hear is yet another example of such a suggestion. Kristine Callis was a PhD candidate at the University of Florida in the Department of Biology. When she had her first child, she started to notice something wrong about much of the way kids are exposed to science and the natural world. Through very common and seeming normal ways, she noticed things were wrong. Instead of just sitting around and let things go, she set out to make a difference. I caught up with Kristine shortly after she and her family moved out to the Northern California area to continue their career, so I could talk to her about her work and how she is hoping to make a difference, giving children a better understanding of biology and the natural world. So today I have on Kristine Callis. Is that correct?
It's Kristine Callis Dual.
Dual. Oh yeah, that's right. You have the hyphenate.
Yes. Yeah, that tricks everybody.
So yeah, because you're married and you just recently moved to the Davis area.
That's correct. Davis, California. We moved from Gainesville, Florida out to Davis, California about 2 months ago.
Does that mean you're going to have to move from the University of Florida to UC Davis?
Yeah, so I'm in the process of transitioning. I'm going to finish up my PhD at the University of Florida in April, but I'm in this odd position where I've already started a postdoc out here at UC Davis. I found a desk somebody offered me some desk space in return for a little bit of work on some plants research. And so I've started doing that out here also and making contacts and trying to figure out exactly what I'm going to be doing once I'm done in April.
Very cool. So your focus is on the studying the evolution of plants.
That's correct. Yeah, plant-insect interactions and plant defense is mostly what I focus on.
Yeah, and when I was reading some of the papers I found that your name was attached to, you do a lot of work with things like how they deal with climate change and things like that.
Yeah, so I'm focused on plant defenses and how that changes across different latitudes, and which ties back into climate change. Because if you think about, if you study plants in the tropics, they're under a very different regime than they are in temperate areas. And so tropical plants, one of the reasons I study them down there is because there is this thought that there's greater insect diversity and greater insect density in the tropical areas. And so I can see how plants interact with those types of herbivores compared to temperate or herbivores. But it also climate then also plays into this, because in the tropical areas, that's more consistent rains, consistent temperatures, where in the temperate areas, of course, you have these winter and summer temperature changes and summer rains and winter tends to be dry. So I look at the climate as well as these insect changes. And the idea is then we can see once plants start to move into new habitats that they were unable to live in previously because of temperature restrictions or water restrictions, that climate change has now started to change for them. That the insects may follow, but the plants and the insects will be moving into different areas, migrating into different areas at different times. And so we can see how the plants interact with those insects that are already in those areas that they have previously not encountered.
Yeah, and then you also like how to use the natural plant defenses for things like pest control.
Right. So one of the great models that I'm able to work with and manipulate is plant silica. And so most people are not very familiar that plants can accumulate silica. And so silica we think of as glass or sand, and what we're familiar with is the solid form of silica. But under high or low pH, silica can become aqueous and go into water. It dissolves into water, and the plant can take it up either through its transpiration, so that'd be passive transport, or it can actually really actively transport it into its xylem, and that's through these receptors. So it's like grabbing it from the environment and pulling it in. So that takes energy, and we know from biology that if an organism is using energy, that it has that performs some important function in the organism. And so until about 5 years ago, we really didn't understand that plants did this active transport of silica into the plant. And now that we've been able to isolate those receptors, we realize that there must be some really important reason that they're doing this. And one of the thoughts is that it's for plant defense. And so what I've been able to do is change the amount of silica that a plant has available to it. And by doing that, change the amount of silica that is inside the plant. So once the plant takes it into its xylem, it deposits it in the leaf areas. And we can think of this as it forming little glass shards inside the leaf. So what happens is that this supersaturated solution of silica starts to precipitate out and form these little glass shards in between the cells of the leaf. And if you've ever felt a leaf in your fingers and it feels like sandpaper, that sandpapery feeling is actually the silica inside the leaf. So you can imagine that an insect flying around looking for a really tasty lunch lands on the plant, and instead of getting a nice big bite of green, crunchy leaf, it gets a mouthful of silica. And the insect, it wears down the mandibles of the insect, and it can tear up the gut of the insect. And you can imagine that insect isn't really going to visit that plant again. It didn't really get the meal that it was looking for. So this can be a pretty effective physical plant defense. And because I'm able to change the amount of silica in plants, it makes a great model system for looking at how physical plant defenses change the way that insects interact with those plants, and how that changes then over this latitudinal gradient that I was previously talking about. So if there's more insects in tropical areas, there's more diversity of them. That means that they might have different adaptations, different mechanisms for overcoming these plant defenses. And so perhaps down there, the insects are able to overcome these silica defenses in other ways that in temperate areas where there are more generalists and lower diversity, those insects might not be able to overcome those plant defenses. But in fact, what we're finding is sort of the opposite of what we had hypothesized. So we thought there was going to be more herbivory in tropical areas because there's more diversity. There is more generations of insects because they don't have to overwinter. They don't have to stop reproducing in the wintertime like they do in temperate areas. And because there's more diversity, we thought they could overcome these defenses. So we thought there'd just be more herbivory in tropical areas on these plants and less herbivory in temperate areas like in the northern part of the United States. And what we're finding is the exact opposite. We're finding that there's much less herbivory in tropical areas and about 10 times greater herbivory in temperate areas.
Wow. See, that's called science. We love that.
It's called research, right? So now I have to kind of go back and try it again. I have to redo my search and just show that what I'm finding these first couple of summers of research is the same thing that I'm going to find in other areas.
So then we're not going to see some new GMO plants that have more of this silica yet.
No, but a lot of crop systems are already using these discoveries. For instance, sugarcane farmers, they use what's called silica slag, which is a byproduct of industry, and they can use that and till it into their soil, and then the sugarcane takes up the silica, and they've been able to decrease the amount of pesticide they need to use on sugarcane dramatically by increasing the amount of silica available to them.
That's very cool.
Yeah, so this is already being used in some crop plants, but what we're trying to show now is that it can be used more widespread in crop plants. So what I'm looking at is cucumbers and pumpkins, which are in a family called Cucurbitaceae, and these are what we consider eudicots, which means that they have broad leaves, and the way that their vascular system works is very different than the grasses. And so sugarcane is a grass, and rice is another crop that silica is used regularly while growing, and that's also in the grass family. And corn is in the grass family. And we've known for about 10 years that those crops can take up silica really well, but wasn't sure if other crops in this eudicot family, which have this different vascular system, so it really changes how it interacts with the environment. And in fact, I was talking about those root receptors that are pulling in the silica, and in eudicots, they don't have as many of those, half as many. And so it wasn't sure that that group of plants could also be used in this silica farming system. But what we're showing is that they do accumulate enough silica that would be effective.
Wow, cool. So then tell me a little bit about the papers I kind of found online that you were involved with in the black tie funeral ceremonies in northern Laos?
So my master's work was looking at medicinal plant uses. And so I should back up and say that I started my career in medicine. And like most people who are going through high school and are good at math and science, I was told, oh, you should be a doctor.
Yes.
And unfortunately, I didn't really understand what other career paths were out there for somebody who liked math and science. So I was very good at, following the system, and I excelled at school. So I went and became a doctor, and then realized that clinical work was not really what I enjoyed. I do enjoy working with people, but there wasn't enough variation day to day for me to keep me interested. I was doing internal medicine, and I would see, 25 patients a day who all had the flu. And while I felt really bad for them and was glad I was able to help them, that doesn't really make for new and interesting things every day that were occurring. So I decided to move into research. And so I started looking at plant defenses and plant medicines. And so my master's degree was looking at plant-based medicine, and that got me involved in working in a research project in the northwestern portion of Laos in the Luang Nam Tha region. And this region, it's in a valley that's surrounded by mountains, and it's near the Chinese and Burmese border. And there's this pretty large village, a couple thousand people who live there, and then outside of that there are these black Thai villages, which usually range between 100 and 200 people. And the black Thai have this very interesting culture that for their funerals, they have these funeral forests. And you can think of them as our cemeteries, except that they are, as described, forests. And so when somebody passes away, they go into the forest, and wherever that person has designated as sort of their plot where they would like to be laid, they cut down the trees in that area, and they form these very elaborate spirit houses. And it's only during the times of a funeral that the trees and plants in that forest can be harvested. So in this way, the forests are quite protected, because people just can't willy-nilly go in there and start cutting things down because they really like this tree, or they need firewood, or there's a medicinal plant over here. It's only during these culturally designated times that things can be harvested. And during that time, they do go in and harvest medicinal plants. And that's where most of their medicinal plants come from. And so originally I started looking at the medicinal plant aspect, but found that this funeral forest aspect was also tightly ingrained into their medicine, because for most of the world, the idea of spirituality and medicine are combined. They think of illness as pertaining to the spiritual world also. And so it's hard to look at cultures in just with just the glasses of medicine, because the spirit plays an important part in that. So I started looking at this whole idea of funeral forests and management of the funeral forests, since they can only go in and cut down trees during certain periods of time. And what I found was really interesting is that it helped preserve the forest. So these forest fragments, so they're just small plots of forest. They have many old growth trees that have been there for years and years, hundreds of years. But their main species of trees, which they deem culturally important, have been harvested out of those forests. Because they're forest fragments, they don't have enough seed bank and they don't have enough recruitment to be able to sustain the populations of trees that are the most desired by the black Thai. And so the headman of the village has taken to going into the forest and marking the trees according to their populations in the forest. So those that the headman finds that are very rare in the forest are then dictated as sort of preserved. People can't cut those down during ceremonies, whereas those that are in abundance, they can cut down. And so without really knowing a lot about ecology and conservation, these headmen have recognized that there's a problem in the forest, and they've started to change the behavior of the local people in order to compensate for that.
Right. And then you did a lot of the papers on how that affected the plant life in that area.
That's correct. Yeah, and which trees are in decline and which are in abundance. And the interesting thing is that there's not, working in this area, it's really difficult to do plant ID because there's been very little work done on the trees and plants in northwestern Laos. And so being able to identify them is really difficult. So a lot of times in papers, we just sort of say, well, this is what they call the tree, and it seems to be very rare, but we don't actually know what it is yet.
So you didn't get a tree named after you?
No, unfortunately, bringing samples out of Laos, because it's a tightly restricted communist country, is very difficult. And so we're able to put samples into the university that is in the capital city, but we're rarely able to get samples shipped out of the country. And there's a professor at the University of Chicago who has been working with them for a long time and is now getting samples taken out of the country. And there's a group of researchers in Europe who's doing the same thing. And so things are starting to change. But when I did this work about 5 years ago, that it was a lot more difficult to get things out of the country at that time. So we weren't able to transport samples back for identification. We just deposited them at the university there in their herbarium.
I think that's one of the things that a lot of people don't think about. We all think about, make big news when they find a new species of fish or mammal. We don't think about the fact all the trees that we still have yet to name or discover.
Yeah, there are so many plants, even here in the United States, when researchers go out into the field, there's so much diversity in plant life that there are still herbaceous plants that have yet to be named or identified.
Especially if you go down to like the southern areas where they have the swampy areas of Louisiana, I'm sure.
Yeah. Well, and this is especially even true with insects. And so there's been many entomologists who just collect insects in their backyard, are able to discover new species of insects, that have been in their backyard for who knows how long, but just happen to have not been collected. So there's a lot of biological life out there that we encounter fairly regularly that is unknown to science just because of the amount of diversity out there. And it's such an interesting world that we live in, that there's that much diversity that over the years we have yet to be able to see everything.
Well, that's kind of cool because, we don't want it to stop anyway.
Right, yeah, but that's why I got into research, is because there's always something new going on.
So tell me a little bit about the SPICE the education system you were involved with. It's an inquiry-based education system?
So the National Science Foundation started putting together these, what they call GK-12. It's graduate to K-12 programs, where it would take graduate students and put them into public school classrooms. And so the University of Florida, where I'm getting my PhD, they have this program called SPICE, and it's Science Partners for Inquiry-Based Education, Collaborative Education. And so the idea was that graduate students, as part of our training in how to communicate science, would be paired up with middle school teachers in under-resourced middle schools and help them to teach science. So what we were bringing to the table was our science background and university resources. And what we learned from the teachers was how to teach and how to communicate science. So the idea is, if I can explain what I'm doing to a 7th grader, I should be able to explain what I'm doing to anybody. And so I worked in the middle school for 2 years, learning about how to teach in an inquiry way. And so instead of our traditional college lectures where instructor is standing up there and telling you everything that you should know about a subject, inquiry takes that and spins it on its head. And so it's using the scientific process to learn science. And so you really get a hands-on and way to investigate the ideas. So you pose a question to the class, and the class then makes observations and a hypothesis and tests out that hypothesis in order to learn about, whatever the material is that you're covering. And in that way, students start to learn what it's like to do science. So my job as a scientist is not to just learn a bunch of facts. And in this day and age, we're able to go online and look up facts. And I'll be the first to admit that Wikipedia is one of my best friends. And as much as instructors say, don't look up things on Wikipedia, many facts are, correct on Wikipedia. And so if I need to know the chemical structure of something, that's the first place I go to and look up the chemical structure. And I don't need to memorize that now. And so memorizing facts is becoming less and less important, but being able to critically think about something, investigate it in a logical and linear way is becoming more important. And so inquiry is using that mentality of investigating a question in order to learn the answer about it, which has really changed my style of teaching, I think, for the better. But I got to work with these great middle schoolers, and it really got me to be passionate about science education. And so as much as I love doing my research, I also have become very interested in science education.
So is that SPICE still going on?
So the SPICE program was that the NSF funding ended, I believe, 2 years ago for it, and the University of Florida has taken over by funding it. It's shrank in size, so we used to have in the tens of fellows, so I think there were 10 or 11 of us at the time, and now they have just 1 or 2 fellows in the program, but it is still going on. And it's not just that NSF pulled funding away. We had a successful program that went really far, and the university was able to take over it, and they're able to then fund other programs at other universities.
So on your website, you have a section called the message to the media. There's a couple really fun letters that you've written. Were those actual letters that actually got put to an editor or something?
No, that's sort of my, I guess, blog would be the best term for it. When I start to read things in the media that get me really upset about the wording, that was one of my outlets for expressing that. And I make sure that all of my students are aware of those misconceptions in the media. So it's just an outlet for me to express my discontent with some of the things that the media says.
I think those letters should be sent to almost every science editor in media, because I think about 70% of them have no idea about science most of the time.
It's true. You see a lot of misconceptions out there, about climate change and evolution and things that we just accept in the sciences as being fact. And it's hard for us to understand that people who do not have science background, or even those that do but might not have the depth and breadth of science background that we do, don't understand the subjects in the same way. And so there's a lot of misconceptions that get printed about calling, climate change, global warming, and that must mean that the world is actually just warming. And that's why we are now trying to make sure we use the terminology climate change, because of course the world is not just warming. There are these fluctuations in climate. And a lot of times news media outlets don't understand the difference between weather and climate, because it'll be really hot one day and they'll say, oh, this is global warming, or it'll be really cold and be like, oh, so much for global warming. But that's just weather. Weather fluctuates on a day-to-day basis, and climate are these overall trends that happen. And so weather plays into climate, but weather has these day-to-day fluctuations that everything has fluctuations day to day. Any data that we look at has these variations in it. And what, as scientists, we're looking at is these larger trends. And so that means we have to look at the data in this big picture idea of overall what is it saying. And climate is doing that for weather and looking at these large patterns and how things are changing, and not just these one-time variations, but what we're seeing are these big variations that are happening over large areas for long periods of time, that are not just getting hot, but they're getting colder, they're getting wetter, or they're getting drier, or the storms are getting more intense. And so those are the fluctuations that we're seeing that we're really concerned with.
And it just goes further evidence the reason why the National Center for Science Education took on climate change, because they usually are focused on evolution, because I think it's part of the same mentality. Is both things require these broad overall looks at reality rather than these little focused areas. And I think it's the same problem. And people have a problem with, well, it's the weather. It's hot today. It's obviously global warming. Or it's cold today. Obviously, it doesn't work. Well, it's like evolution. You have to look at the long-term data. Then you can't just focus on this little tiny thing. So I think that's a problem with people. They can't view those long-term things just in a soundbite.
Yes, and it's hard for any human to be able to do that because we are so focused on day-to-day activities and are trying to get through one day or the next, that we have a hard time stepping back from that and looking at these big pictures that are outside of ourselves. We have to not worry about what's affecting us today or tomorrow or next week, and step back and look at all of humanity or all of the globe and see what's going on, outside of our own little world. And so it's hard for us to do that on a day-to-day basis, and it's especially hard for people outside the sciences to understand that these things are affecting them. It's just harder to see on that day-to-day perspective.
So, up to now, we've learned some really cool stuff about you. You've been like Laos and all these cool things. But, I'm not actually have you on today for any of that, because I have you on because of your new books.
Yes.
The Budding Biologist.
Right. So, during all of these things that I've been doing, traveling all over the globe, which has been the really fun side bit of research, is that I've been able to travel everywhere. I also started a family. And so when my son was born 2 years ago, like every good parent, I started to read to him from day one. And in reading to him, I became very frustrated with the misconceptions, the scientific misconceptions in children's books. So I work a lot with insects, and so I decorated his entire nursery in insects. And I was excited to read to him all about the natural world and the world that I study and am so passionate about. And so I got all these books about insects and plants and animals, and I would sit down to read to him, and I'd open a book about bugs. And in this book, they would have spiders. and I just had to scratch my head and be like, okay, who wrote this book? Because did they miss the part in high school science where they taught about the characteristics of an insect having 6 legs? And I can obviously count that a spider has 8, and so a spider is not an insect. And so, almost every book about bugs that I read to him had spiders, but they'd have even more egregious misconceptions than that, in that some of these books would include things like snails and lizards and frogs and turtles. These are phyla-level differences. These are not even, at least a spider is arthropod, but these are not even the same phyla as insects. And so I started to become very worried about our science education in the United States, in that from very early age, we are reading these books to children that have scientific misconceptions. And when I started talking to other parents about my concerns, what I found was that these misconceptions continued through to adulthood. And so back when my son was born, there was this, another example was that there was this very popular nursery decor, which was rainforest babies. And they had a book series that went along with it. But, my son they had been given the jumperoo that had rainforest babies on it, and the bouncer, and all of these things. And I was sitting there looking at his bouncer over breakfast one morning and saying, oh, rainforest babies, is that a giraffe head off the top of his bouncer? Oh, it is. And look at that zebra hiding behind that leaf over there. Somebody hasn't visited the rainforest before making this, because the rainforest, I just had to imagine that poor giraffe running through the rainforest, trying and getting its neck caught in all of the vines that cover the rainforest. These are savanna animals. They're used to wide open grassy spaces with tall acacia trees, not running through rainforests. And so even on that level, most parents are too sleep deprived to really notice these things. But because I've been able to do research in these areas and visit them, I'm very aware of what the flora and fauna looks like. And so that started to bother me. And I said, as with most things, I think, okay, if this is wrong, I can do better than this, and I can fix this problem. And so I said, I'm going to go ahead and fix this problem, and I'm going to start writing children's books that are scientifically accurate. So while I was on maternity leave, I started writing a children's book, and I had befriended a woman in my birthing class who was an artist, Katie, and she's the illustrator of the children's book. And so she, as we started to talk, became really passionate also about, this science misconceptions in children's books and creating scientifically accurate children's books. And she's an amazing artist who's been able to create these really wonderful characters for our book. And my background with the SPICE program, the GK-12 program, led me to write the book in an inquiry type way, so that we pose questions about, is this animal an insect? And then when you turn the page, you actually find out the answer and what makes it an insect. And so instead of just giving the children information, we're actually trying to get them to think about what characteristics make an insect, so they can go on and apply those characteristics outside of just reading the book.
And they're kind of like little short books with really colorful animations, pictures in them, which kids like.
Yeah, so we tried to make the colors really vibrant, and Katie worked really hard at making them likable and still keep them scientifically accurate. So I'm actually a bit arachnophobic. I'm not that thrilled with spiders. I come across them, of course, all the time in my work, and that's fine. But when they're inside my house, I'm not too thrilled. And so when she was creating the spider, she would ask me, she'd be like, okay, does this spider look scary to you, or does it look likable? And so even though they're completely anatomically correct and scientifically accurate, she tried to make them so that they were not scary, so that they were inviting. And I think she's really accomplished that well, so that we have these bright, vibrant pictures in there but they also show all the anatomical parts that we're talking about, so that they show the three body parts, the head, the thorax, and the abdomen, so that they show the wings spread. And so that students and children reading, and it's parents who are reading the books, but that the kids who are looking at the books can see all of the parts that we're describing, so that they can later go on and identify those in nature.
Now, and also there's, on the website, there's things like lesson plans. Are you do that because if there's parents who want to teach their younger kids before school type of, lessons?
So there's four of us in Budding Biologist. There's myself and the illustrator, Katie Castronovo. And then we quickly pulled on two other moms, my childhood best friend, Emily Bingham-Zora, and another mom I met in my birthing class, Karen Boyle. And she is an education person. And so she has a degree in early childhood education, and she created these lesson plans based on our book for the preschool and pre-K and kindergarten age groups. And so they can be used by parents who want to do some early childhood education before their children get to school, but they can also be used by these early childhood education teachers. Because our book, one of the fun things about the book for the parents is that the back cover of the book gives a way to use the book. And so it has different levels in the book. And so in the beginning, when your child is very young, you're just introducing the pictures of the book and talking about what is this animal and identifying the animal. And then through that, you move forward into asking the questions and applying the information that you're learning in the book outside of the book. And so we try to give these different levels. So the book really runs from very early, babies who are lying in your lap and you're just, identifying animals to them, all the way through kindergartners who are able to take the information that we're reading to them and apply it outside of the book. And so the lesson plans are for those little bit older kids and students who the teachers can then use our books. And Karen has done such a great job writing all of the curriculum for different subjects. So she has ways in physical education that you can pretend to be an insect and move like an insect. She has lesson plans for music and for art and for science and for language arts. And so she's taken our books and created all of these lesson plans that teachers can use based on the book. And we've put them up for free on our website because we realize that teachers have very few resources. And the more access they have to scientifically accurate lesson plans, the better chance we have of getting that science into the classroom.
And now your first book was Am I an Insect? And then you have other books, but they haven't come out yet, which is another thing I wanted to get you on for, because to get the next books made, you need help.
Yeah, so we've started this company and this series of budding biologist books because there's this need out there for scientifically accurate and fun children's books. But what we didn't realize going in was how expensive it is to produce a book. And so, of course, we put in many, many hours into making these books, but just printing the books themselves and getting, using the illustration programs to put them together is very expensive. And so we have turned to crowdsourcing our second book because we feel that there's a desire out there from parents and teachers to have accurate information for their kids and fun but scientifically accurate books. And so we're hoping to elicit help from all of the people who are interested in pursuing scientifically accurate education for their young children to help us fund these next set of books. And so the next book that we have coming out, which we have made a project on Kickstarter for, is called Where Do I Live? And it's animal adaptations to their environment. And so we pose a biome, for instance, a boreal forest, and we talk about what that biome looks like, that it tends to be snowy and icy during most of the year, and then it melts in the summertime for a short period of time. And then we give two different animals. And so in this case, it would be a Siberian tiger and a cheetah. And we ask the reader, which of these animals do you think lives in this snowy, icy habitat? And so then you turn the page and it describes where each of those animals live and what adaptations they have that help them survive. And so the Siberian tiger lives in the boreal forest, and its light colored fur in the wintertime is very thick, and its stripes help it hide behind the leafless branches. And then in the summertime, its coat actually changes so that it becomes much thinner and darker in color, and that helps it camouflage behind leafy branches as it's hunting. Whereas the cheetah is from the savannas, the grasslands in Africa, and its spots help it hide it, and its tan fur helps it hide it in the long grasses in the grasslands. But it has a very thin coat of fur so that it doesn't keep it warm, but instead helps it cool off in these warm habitats. And so throughout the book, we describe a biome and then ask the reader to identify which animals out of these choices might live in there, and then describe what adaptations they have. And so this has been a really difficult book to write because there are so many biomes out there, and in science we have many different ways of splitting these things up because there's not concrete, distinct edges to these biomes. They flow into one another. It's not like someone can just draw a fence and be like, okay, it ends here, this biome ends here and starts here. And they just sort of bleed into each other, and so they're in between biomes, and so we have different ways of splitting them up and different levels of splitting them up, and so choosing which ones to include in the book and what animals to include in those areas. Because, of course, the animals, they don't know when their biome ends, right? So they don't come to the edge of the Siberian tiger doesn't come to the edge of the boreal forest and be like, oh, that's it, this is the end. It flows into the tundra. It goes wherever it finds food, wherever it's roaming. And so they have much larger spaces than that they roam than just that biome. And so it's been a more difficult book and a more interesting book to write because of that. But we've got this Kickstarter that we have going, and we're hoping to get people to help fund the second book that we have in the works right now. Katie's been working really hard on the illustrations. She's done a beautiful job, and there's some examples up on the Kickstarter. In fact, we have a little video that she made up on the updates on the Kickstarter of how she actually goes through doing the illustrations and making the illustrations. And so we're off to a good start, but we have a long way to go. And so we're hoping that people who are interested in science education and scientifically accurate children's books can help us out by visiting our Kickstarter page and thinking about some donations. And we've got some great rewards for people who want to contribute.
And we only have about 2 or 3 weeks left.
That's right. So it ends January 2nd. And we, for better or for worse, have launched it during a holiday season. And so we're keeping our fingers crossed that people are still interested in promoting Kickstarter projects during the time when they're out trying to buy all of these holiday gifts. But we do have, if people are interested in purchasing our first book, we do have a way for you to order that. If you visit the Kickstarter page and donate, then just contact us and we can get you those books in time for Christmas. And then they're also on Amazon. And our second book, since we're working on it while the Kickstarter campaign is going, we hope to have that one done in January, and that one will come out. And then you'll see on our Kickstarter page and on our website, we have a whole list of books that we want to write. I'm, of course, a plant person from training, and so I'm really excited about the third book in our series, which is going to be a plant book. And I haven't decided yet if I want to tackle the what is a plant or adaptations of plants. So one of the things I find students have misconceptions about plants being, fungi being parts of plants, and what's the difference between is a moss a plant, is a mushroom a plant, is a lichen a plant, is a fern a plant. And so I'd like to write a book looking at characteristics of plants, but I also really want to write a book looking at plant adaptations, because plants are super cool. They've been able to adapt to almost every habitat in the world. They live underwater, and they live in really dry areas, and they live out on the outcropping of rocks that gets wind blown every day. And so I haven't decided yet which one of those 2 subjects I want to tackle with the plant book, but that will be our third book. It will be a plant book.
Some are even carnivores.
Yes, exactly. Some of them live in soils that are so depleted of nutrients that they've taken to digesting higher organisms, insects, and small mammals.
That's very cool. So, everybody's listening, it's that time of year, so if you're looking for a stocking stuffer or possibly a book, I would look at the Kickstarter, because I think it's a dual thing. You get something for Christmas for somebody or yourself or your kid, and you promote more science education for kids, which is sorely required and needed. So thank you so much for being on the show.
Well, thank you for having me. This has been a lot of fun. Yeah. I love your podcast. It's very interesting, and I hope that everyone out there listening will take a look at us as one way to help get science education out there, just like your podcast is doing.
Very cool. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
As usual, I give a huge thanks to all the contributors for this episode, especially Kristine for taking the time out of her busy schedule to come on the show. We talked about the cool Kickstarter campaign that Kristine has set up for a kids' book series. Make sure you go to the show notes and check out the links to the current book and see the artwork and a bit of the content, and consider pitching in. It could help out and even make a good present. As usual, you can find links to that and everything else you heard on the website in the show notes at www.skepticality.com.
Like Skepticality? You can help out the show by writing a good review for the show on iTunes, or by going to our website, clearing your browser cookies, and clicking on the Amazon link at the top of our homepage. Every little bit helps keep the show coming to you free on a regular basis.
Hungry for more skepticism? Want to learn the truth about the scientific controversies of our time? Then subscribe to Skeptic, the quarterly magazine Stephen Jay Gould called the best journal in the field. To subscribe, visit skeptic.com today.